The strange symbols flickered across every screen in the Naval Space Command Center. Lieutenant Alan Burke rubbed his tired eyes, wondering if lack of sleep was making him see things. But the symbols remained, pulsing with an eerie blue light. "Sir, this signal is broadcasting on all frequencies," said Lisa Grant. Her voice shook slightly as her fingers moved across her console. "It's everywhere. Television, radio, internet, military channels. Even devices that were turned off are turning on by themselves." Alan leaned closer to the main screen. The symbols looked like a mix of geometry and math, nothing like any language he had seen before. "How long has this been going?" 3 minutes and 27 seconds, Lisa replied. "And sir, we're getting reports that it's happening worldwide." The command center doors slid open. Admiral Frank Peters strode in, his face grim. Even in the middle of the night, he wore his uniform perfectly. "Report," he barked. Alan stood straight. "Unknown transmission appearing on all screens globally, sir. We can't block it or trace its origin." "We can trace it now," called out Officer Greg Wilson from the tracking station. "Something just appeared near Mars orbit. Something big." The main screen changed to show a grainy image from the Mars Orbital Telescope. At first, Alan saw nothing but stars. Then he noticed it, a dark shape blocking out the stars. As the telescope adjusted, the shape became clearer. It was a ship. No, not just a ship, a fleet of ships. "That's impossible," whispered the Admiral. "Our deep space monitoring should have detected them long before they reached Mars." "They appeared out of nowhere, sir," Greg said. 1 second nothing, next second, there they were. "How long until they reach Earth?" the Admiral asked. Greg checked his calculations twice. "At their current speed, 72 hours. The room fell silent. 72 hours to prepare for the first confirmed alien contact in human history. 72 hours to figure out if they came in peace or with more dangerous intentions. "Get me the President," Admiral Peters said quietly, "and contact the heads of the Extraterrestrial Response Initiative. Tell them it's not a drill." 6 hours later, Alan stood in the back of a crowded meeting room in the Pentagon. The Joint Chiefs of Staff sat around a large table with the top scientists from the newly formed ERI. President Joseph Warren joined by secure video link, his face showing the strain of the situation. "What do we know about the message?" the President asked. Dr. Susan Miller, the leading expert in theoretical alien languages, stood up. She was a small woman with large glasses and spoke with careful precision. "The message appears to be mathematical in nature," she explained. "It begins with basic principles, the value of pi, the Fibonacci sequence, prime numbers, then moves to more complex equations. We believe it's their way of establishing communication through universal constants. Or it could be a countdown to attack," said General Paul Wright, pounding his fist on the table. The general headed the Space Defense Force and had argued for years that humanity needed better weapons in space. "We can't assume friendly intentions." "We can't assume hostility either," Dr. Miller countered. "First contact situations are delicate. If we respond with aggression to what might be a peaceful greeting, we could start a war we can't win." The President sighed. "What about their technology? Those ships appeared with no warning." Dr. Ben Howard, head of astrophysics at NASA, cleared his throat. "The ships suggest technology far beyond our own. They may have some form of faster-than-light travel, or the ability to mask their approach. Either way, it means they're centuries ahead of us technologically. Which is exactly why we need to show strength," General Wright insisted. "If they're that advanced, appearing weak could be disastrous." The argument continued as Alan watched. Scientists urged caution and communication attempts. Military leaders pushed for defensive preparations. The President listened to both sides, his expression growing more troubled. Finally, he raised his hand for silence. "We'll do both. Dr. Miller, continue working on deciphering the message. Try to establish communication if possible. General Wright, put our forces on high alert, but take no aggressive action without my direct order. I want options, not just for fighting, but for talking too." As the meeting broke up, Alan found himself walking alongside Dr. Miller in the hallway. Do you really think they might be peaceful? He asked her. She smiled slightly. I think if they wanted to destroy us, they wouldn't announce their arrival. They'd just do it. The fact that they're communicating gives me hope. Alan nodded. I hope you're right. In the days that followed, humanity held its collective breath. The alien fleet moved steadily closer, maintaining its position just beyond the orbit of Earth's moon. More messages came, each more complex than the last. Dr. Miller's team worked around the clock trying to formulate a response. Meanwhile, in secret bunkers around the world, military leaders prepared for the worst. Alan was assigned to monitor the fleet's movements. Hour after hour, he watched the strange ships on his screen. They were beautiful in a way, sleek shapes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They're just sitting there, Lisa said during their shift change, watching us like we're some kind of ant farm. Alan nodded. Maybe they are studying us. That's what worries me, Lisa replied. What if they don't like what they see? Unknown to both of them, the aliens were indeed studying humanity with great interest. Their monitoring systems captured every television broadcast, every radio signal, every internet communication. They watched human movies about alien invasions. They observed military exercises. They cataloged weapons tests and border disputes. They watched as humans rushed to arm their space stations and as governments around the world began evacuating important people to underground bunkers, and they made notes about a species that, when faced with the unknown, reached first for weapons rather than words. On the third day, the alien mothership moved into Earth orbit. Smaller vessels deployed, taking positions over major cities and military installations worldwide. In the Oval Office, President Warren prepared to address the nation. His speechwriters had crafted careful words about hope and peaceful intentions, even as his military advisors finalized plans for a first strike. The world is watching, Mr. President, his chief of staff reminded him. How you handle this will be remembered forever. If there is a forever after today, the president replied grimly. He straightened his tie, looked into the camera, and began to speak words of reassurance that he himself didn't fully believe. Across the ocean, aboard the experimental warship Defiant, Captain Eric Nelson received his classified orders. Operation First Strike would begin in 6 hours, a coordinated attack designed to test the aliens' defenses and show them that humanity wouldn't surrender without a fight. Prepare all systems, he told his crew. Today we make history. His second-in-command, Commander Diana Fletcher, looked troubled. Sir, are we sure this is the right move? We know nothing about their capabilities. That's why we need to probe their defenses, he replied confidently. Trust me, Commander. Humans have been perfecting warfare for thousands of years. We might surprise them. Diana wasn't convinced, but she followed her orders. As the crew prepared for battle, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were making a terrible mistake. They had no idea just how terrible it would turn out to be. Captain Eric Nelson stood on the bridge of the Defiant, watching Earth grow smaller in the view screen. The experimental warship had been built in secret, using technology reverse-engineered from crashed satellites and years of research. It was humanity's most advanced weapon, and today it would lead the charge against an unknown enemy. All systems operational, Captain, reported Commander Diana Fletcher. Her voice was steady, but Eric noticed how tightly she gripped her tablet. Stealth systems engaged. As far as we can tell, the aliens haven't detected us yet. Excellent, Eric said. What's the status of the other strike teams? Submarines in position, fighter squadrons ready for launch, ground-based laser systems online. Diana hesitated. Sir, I feel I should mention one more time that we're making a lot of assumptions about their technology. What works against human enemies might not. Noted, Commander. Eric cut her off. But orders are orders. The President believes a show of force will earn their respect. If they came looking for an easy conquest, we need to disabuse them of that notion quickly. Diana fell silent. She had voiced her concerns, done her duty. Now she would follow orders, even if those orders felt like throwing stones at a hurricane. Professor George Hoffman hadn't slept in 3 days. The basement laboratory at MIT was cluttered with coffee cups and printouts of the alien messages. His research assistant, Kate Martinez, was slumped in a chair nearby, finally giving in to exhaustion. George stared at his computer screen, where the latest alien transmission was being analyzed. Something about the pattern had been bothering him. The mathematical sequences were clear enough, universal constants that any advanced civilization would recognize. But there was something else embedded in the signal, something subtle. It's not just mathematics, he muttered to himself. It's behavioral. He adjusted the parameters of his analysis program, looking not at the symbols themselves but at the spaces between them, the timing of the transmission, the frequency shifts. Suddenly, the computer beeped. A new pattern emerged on the screen, one that made George's blood run cold. "Kate, wake up!" He shook his assistant's shoulder urgently. Kate jerked awake. "What? Did they attack?" "No, but we might," George said, pointing at the screen. "Look at this. The aliens aren't just saying hello, they're evaluating us." Kate rubbed her eyes and leaned forward. "I don't understand." "The transmission pattern," George explained frantically. "It's a psychological test. The timing between sequences, the way the symbols are arranged, it's designed to provoke a response. They're testing our reaction to determine our level of development. And if we fail the test?" Kate asked quietly. George reached for the phone. "We need to warn Washington now." But when he dialed the emergency line he'd been given, all he got was a busy signal. The military was already mobilizing. No one had time to listen to another scientist with another theory. In the White House Situation Room, President Joseph Warren watched grimly as military officers made final preparations for Operation First Strike. Screens around the room showed alien vessels positioned above major cities worldwide. "Mr. President," General Wright said, "all forces are in position. We await your final authorization." Joseph stared at the images of the alien ships. They had made no aggressive moves, simply holding position. Yet their presence alone was an existential threat. If he waited and they attacked first, humanity might never recover. "The Joint Chiefs are unanimous," Wright pressed. "We need to act now while we still can." "And the scientists?" Joseph asked. "With all due respect, sir, we don't have time for more theories. If these aliens wanted peace, they would have said so clearly. Their silence is threatening." Joseph didn't mention that the aliens hadn't been silent at all. They'd been sending messages non-stop. Messages that humans only partially understood. He thought of his children, his grandchildren. What world would they inherit if he made the wrong choice today? "Very well," he said finally. "You have authorization. Commence Operation First Strike. Aboard." The Defiant, the order came through with a simple coded phrase, "Thunderbird is flying." "All hands to battle stations," Eric announced over the ship's comm system. "Prepare to engage alien vessels on my mark." The crew moved with practiced efficiency. The Defiant's advanced weapon systems powered up. In the engine room, engineers watched nervously as the experimental drive core glowed brighter than it ever had during testing. Diana monitored communications from other strike forces. Submarines launching missiles, fighter jets taking off, ground, teams activating laser systems. "Perfect," Eric said. "Let's show these visitors that humanity won't go quietly." Around the world, humanity's first strike unfolded with precision. Nuclear submarines launched specially designed missiles with electromagnetic pulse warheads. Fighter jets streaked toward the alien vessels. Ground-based laser installations, hidden in mountains and deserts, powered up to full capacity. For 29 seconds, everything went according to plan. The missiles closed in on their targets. The fighter jets reported clear approaches. The laser systems locked on. On the Defiant, Eric watched with growing confidence. "See? They didn't expect this. We've caught them off guard." Diana wasn't so sure. The alien vessels hadn't moved, hadn't deployed countermeasures. It was as if they were simply watching the attack unfold. "Sir," she said slowly, "something's not right. They're not reacting at exactly the 30-second mark. Everything stopped. The missiles froze in mid-air, suspended as if time itself had halted. The fighter jet's engines cut out simultaneously. The lasers powered down. On military bases worldwide, tanks stopped in their tracks. Radar installations went dark. Nuclear silos automatically sealed themselves. On the Defiant, the lights flickered and died. The engine's hum faded to silence. Even the emergency backup systems failed to engage. "What just happened?" Eric demanded. But no one had an answer. In the sudden darkness of the bridge, the crew could only stare at each other in confusion and growing fear. Diana looked out the viewport at the stars. "They did something to our technology," she whispered. "All of it. Everywhere." The ship drifted, powerless, in the cold emptiness of space. And far below, across the planet that had just attempted its first interstellar war, humanity was experiencing the same shocking revelation. The aliens had defeated them without firing a single shot, without a declaration of war, without any apparent effort at all. In his laboratory, Professor George Hoffman watched his computer shut down mid-analysis. "We failed the test," he said to Kate, his voice hollow. "And now we're going to learn what happens to species that don't pass." In the White House, as the lights went out and the screens went dark, President Warren put his head in his hands. The most powerful man on Earth had just discovered how little power that truly meant. And somewhere in the void between the warring planet and its moon, the alien mothership began to broadcast a new message. This one wouldn't need translation. Darkness covered the planet. Not complete darkness. Hospitals still had power, as did homes and basic infrastructure. But anything that could be used as a weapon simply stopped working. In the Pentagon's Emergency Command Center, military leaders huddled around battery-powered lamps. Their sophisticated war room, with its advanced computers and communication systems, had been reduced to a cave with fancy furniture. "Reports are coming in from all sites," said a young officer, reading from a handwritten note. "Every military installation worldwide is experiencing the same thing. Weapon systems offline, vehicles disabled, communications limited to runners and basic radios." General Paul Wright paced the room, his face red with anger and embarrassment. "They knew exactly what to target. They shut down our offensive capabilities but left civilian systems mostly intact. Which means they can distinguish between military and civilian technology," said Dr. Susan Miller, who had been called to the emergency meeting. "That level of precision is remarkable." "Remarkable?" General Wright spun to face her. "They've crippled the most powerful military force in human history in less than a minute, and you call it remarkable?" "I call it deliberate," she replied, calmly. "If they wanted to destroy us, they could have. Instead, they chose to disarm us." The room fell silent as her words sank in. The aliens hadn't defeated humanity in battle. They had simply taken away humanity's ability to fight at all. On the Defiant, drifting helplessly in space, Captain Eric Nelson and his crew worked by the glow of chemical light sticks. Without power, the ship's life support would eventually fail. They had perhaps 48 hours of emergency oxygen. "Any progress on the engines?" Eric asked, his voice tense. Commander Diana Fletcher shook her head. "Nothing works. It's like the systems are all intact, but something is preventing them from functioning. Chief Engineer Doug says it's as if the laws of physics have been selectively changed just for our technology." Eric slammed his fist against a dead console. "So we just wait here to die? Is that the plan?" "I don't think that's their intention," Diana said quietly. "Look." She pointed out the viewport. One of the smaller alien vessels was approaching them. It moved with silent grace, gliding through space like a shark through water. "Battle positions," Eric ordered automatically, then caught himself. "Forget it, we have no weapons, no shields, nothing." The alien ship drew alongside the Defiant. For a long moment nothing happened, then a beam of soft blue light engulfed the human vessel. "Are they scanning us?" someone asked. "I think they're—" Diana didn't finish her sentence because suddenly, the lights on the Defiant flickered back on. The hum of the life support systems returned. Screens lit up one by one, but the weapons systems remained dead. And the engines stayed offline. A message appeared on the main screen in perfect English. Your vessel will be towed to your planet. You are not in danger. Eric stared at the screen in disbelief. They're giving us a ride home? After we tried to attack them, Diana said, equally stunned. Yes, it seems they are. In the MIT laboratory, Professor George Hoffman and Kate Martinez had been working by candlelight, trying to make sense of the final alien transmission before everything shut down. When their computers suddenly came back on, they nearly jumped out of their skin. What's happening? Kate asked. George watched as his monitor displayed a new message. Unlike the previous mathematical symbols, this one was in clear English. Your species has been classified as potentially self-destructive. Your technological development has been temporarily restricted. Diplomatic contact will resume when societal maturity indicators improve. You have been quarantined for your own protection. Oh my God, George whispered. We were right. It was a test. And we failed spectacularly. Kate read the message again. Temporarily restricted? Quarantined? What does that mean exactly? Before George could answer, his phone rang, the first working call since the blackout. It was from Washington. Professor Hoffman? This is the White House Chief of Staff. The President needs you here immediately. We're sending a helicopter. In the White House Situation Room, President Joseph Warren sat with his head in his hands. The room was functional again. Lights, air conditioning, computers. But the screens showing military readiness all displayed the same message. Access restricted. When Professor Hoffman was shown in, the president looked up with hollow eyes. Professor, I'm told you predicted this. George shifted uncomfortably. Not exactly, Mr. President. I realized the transmissions were a test, but I didn't know what would happen if we failed. Well, now we all know, the president said bitterly. They've put us in timeout like misbehaving children. Dr. Susan Miller, who was also present, spoke up. It's more complex than that, sir. From what we can tell, they've selectively disabled only technologies that could be used for warfare or space travel. Medical equipment is working. Power plants are online. Food production, water treatment, all functioning. So they've taken away our guns but left us our teddy bears, General Wright growled. They've taken away our ability to harm them or each other, George corrected. And yes, left us everything we need to survive and develop as a society. The president gestured to a technician, who brought up satellite imagery on the main screen. It showed the alien mothership deploying small devices in Earth orbit, a network of satellites or monitoring stations. They're watching us, the president said. But not interfering beyond the technology restriction. The question is, what do we do now? We do the only thing we can, Dr. Miller suggested. We try to understand what societal maturity indicators they're looking for, and we work to achieve them. You're suggesting we just accept this invasion? General Wright demanded. I'm suggesting we recognize reality, she replied. They could have destroyed us. Instead, they've given us a chance to grow up. Around the world, people emerged from the initial shock to discover a changed reality. Military bases stood silent, their weapons useless. Space programs found their rockets would no longer ignite. But hospitals continued saving lives. Farms kept producing food. Schools remained open. In New York City, Jane Baker walked her son to school just as she did every day. The streets were oddly quiet without military vehicles rumbling through for the daily patrols. Mom, are the aliens going to hurt us? Her son asked. Jane thought about it. The news had been playing the alien message non-stop. Quarantined for your own protection. No attacks had followed, no demands, just the removal of humanity's ability to wage war. I don't think so, honey, she said finally. I think they might actually be trying to help us in their strange way. By taking our stuff? By taking away the things we use to hurt each other, she explained. Like when I take away your video games when you hit your sister. The boy considered this. So we're being punished? Jane looked up at the sky where one of the alien ships could be seen floating silently above the city. Not punished, taught. In a secret government facility, scientists brought Captain Eric Nelson and Commander Diana Fletcher after their rescue from space. They were being debriefed about their close encounter with the alien vessel. "They could have let us die up there," Diana told the panel of officials. "Our life support was failing, but they fixed it, just enough to keep us alive, and brought us home." "Not exactly the actions of a hostile invader," Eric admitted, still struggling to reconcile his military training with what he had experienced. "Then what are they?" someone asked. Diana thought about the message on their screen, about being towed home like a broken-down car on a highway. "I think," she said slowly, "they might be the cosmic equivalent of park rangers, and we just got caught feeding the bears." 3 months after what people now called the 30-second war, a new normal had settled across Earth. The alien ships remained in orbit, silent watchers over a rapidly changing world. Lieutenant Alan Burke, now assigned to the newly formed Interspecies Relations Committee, sat in a United Nations meeting room in New York. Representatives from every nation filled the seats, a gathering that would have been impossible before the aliens came. Old enemies now sat side by side, their military posturing rendered meaningless by the technological quarantine. "The latest tests confirm what we already suspected," announced Dr. Susan Miller at the podium. "The restriction field affects only specific technologies. Weapons above a certain destructive threshold simply will not function. The same applies to space launch vehicles and certain communication systems that could be weaponized." A representative from Russia raised his hand. "Have we determined the exact limitations? What weapons still work?" "Basic firearms function," Susan replied. "Police forces can maintain order. But anything designed for mass destruction, missiles, bombs, artillery, those are completely neutralized." Alan noticed how the conversation always circled back to weapons. Even now, with proof of vastly superior alien technology literally hanging over their heads, humans were still obsessed with their ability to fight. The Chinese delegate spoke next. "And their monitoring system? What have we learned about the devices they placed in orbit?" Professor George Hoffman took the microphone. "They appear to be passive observation platforms, though they emit the field that restricts our technology. We've detected no communications between them and the main alien fleet, which has now retreated to the edge of our solar system." "So they're watching us," said the American representative, "looking for these societal maturity indicators mentioned in their message. Has anyone figured out what those might be?" Susan and George exchanged glances. "We have theories," Susan said carefully. "Based on the precise technologies they've restricted, it seems clear they're concerned about our tendency toward violence and self-destruction. They've taken away our ability to wage large-scale war or to extend that violence into space. They've put us in a timeout," muttered someone, drawing nervous laughter. "A more accurate analogy," George suggested, "would be child-proofing a home. They've removed the most dangerous items but left us free to develop in other ways." Alan thought this was an important point. "We should note that medical research has been completely unaffected. Same with agricultural technology, environmental, science, and most forms of energy production. Only nuclear plants that could be used to produce weapons-grade material have been restricted. So they're not trying to harm us," the Secretary General concluded. "They're trying to guide our development." "Or control it," said the Russian representative darkly. In Washington, D.C., President Joseph Warren met with his newly reorganized cabinet. With the Department of Defense effectively neutered, military budgets had been redirected to science, healthcare, and infrastructure. The latest polling shows 63% of Americans now view the alien presence positively, reported his chief of staff. That's up from 22% in the first week after the intervention. Joseph wasn't surprised. After the initial fear had passed, people had begun to notice benefits. Without the constant threat of war, nations had turned their resources inward, and, without working weapons, violence had dropped significantly worldwide. "What about the freedom from alien influence protests?" he asked. "Declining in most cities. There was some property damage in Atlanta last week, but nothing serious." The president nodded. Not everyone was happy about Earth's new babysitters. Some saw the technology restrictions as an intolerable violation of human sovereignty. Others feared this was just the first step toward more direct alien control. And our communication attempts? He asked, turning to the science advisor. Still, no direct response to our transmissions, she replied. They received our messages, we can tell that much, but they seem content to observe without engaging further. Joseph sighed. They made their point pretty clearly. Now they're waiting to see what we do with the lesson. Lisa Grant had been reassigned from Naval Space Command to the new Alien Technology Study Group. Today, she was examining one of the few alien artifacts humans had managed to recover, a small probe that had fallen from orbit after being damaged by space debris. Anything new? Asked her colleague Sam. Lisa shook her head in frustration. It's like trying to understand a smartphone with stone tools. The materials aren't like anything we've seen before. The internal structure defies our physics in some ways. She carefully turned the damaged section of the probe. The outer shell had cracked, revealing something like circuitry beneath, except it seemed to flow like liquid while maintaining rigid pathways. The one thing we know for certain, she continued, is that it's monitoring us. Not just our technology, but our behavior. Look at these sensor arrays. They're designed to detect and analyze patterns of activity over large areas. They're studying us, Sam said. Like we're some kind of science experiment. Or like doctors monitoring a patient, Lisa suggested. Remember, their message said we're quarantined for our protection. That implies they think we're sick in some way. Sick with violence, Sam muttered. Hard to argue with their diagnosis. At a small farm in Iowa, former Captain Eric Nelson pulled weeds from his vegetable garden. After being rescued from space and debriefed, he had resigned his commission. The military had little use for starship captains now anyway. Diana Fletcher pulled her truck into his driveway. She visited every few weeks, one of the few people from his old life he still kept in touch with. How's civilian life treating you? She asked, helping him gather tomatoes. Better than I expected, Eric admitted. There's something satisfying about growing things instead of planning how to blow them up. They sat on his porch as the sun began to set. In the darkening sky, one of the alien monitoring stations passed overhead, a bright point of light among the stars. Do you ever miss it? Diana asked. Space. The mission. Eric considered the question. I miss the purpose. The feeling that I was protecting people. But now I wonder if we were thinking about protection all wrong. How so? We thought safety came from having the biggest weapons, the strongest defenses. But look at the world now. He gestured broadly. No nuclear weapons, no armies massed at borders, no military budgets draining resources from schools and hospitals. In some ways, we're safer than we've ever been. Diana nodded slowly. I've been working with the diplomatic team trying to establish communication with them. We think they might respond if we can demonstrate enough progress. Progress toward what? That's the big question. Based on everything we've learned, they seem to view violence as a developmental disorder, something young species go through but need to outgrow. Eric watched the alien satellite disappear over the horizon. And have we? Outgrown it? 3 months of forced peace isn't the same as choosing peace, Diana said, but it's a start. People are beginning to imagine a different way of living. The question is whether we'll maintain it if they ever lift the restrictions. Eric picked up a ripe tomato, feeling its weight in his hand. That's the real test, isn't it? Not whether we can behave while they're watching, but what we'll do if they ever leave us alone again. In orbit, the alien monitoring stations continued their silent observation. Their sensors recorded human activity across the planet. Mapping, changes in behavior, resource allocation, social organization. They measured radiation levels, pollution, deforestation, all declining since the intervention. They noted the new organizations forming, dedicated to interspecies communication. They observed the repurposing of military installations for civilian use. They tracked the global shift in spending from weapons to human needs. All this data flowed back to the main fleet at the edge of the solar system, where it was analyzed against patterns seen on 17 other worlds where similar interventions had occurred. Some of those species had eventually passed the test, earning their technological freedom. Others had failed, requiring centuries of guidance before they were ready. It was too soon to tell which path humanity would take. But the early signs were promising. 1 year after the aliens had neutralized Earth's military technology, Lieutenant Alan Burke stood at the podium in the United Nations General Assembly. The room was packed with delegates from every nation, plus scientists, religious leaders, and cultural representatives. This was the most important speech of his life. 1 year ago today, Alan began, humanity attempted its first interstellar war. It lasted 30 seconds and we lost without a single shot being fired by our visitors. He paused, looking across the sea of faces. Today, I present the findings of the Interspecies Relations Committee on what we've learned and how we might move forward. Behind him, a large screen displayed images from around the world. Former missile silos converted to food storage, battleships transformed into research vessels, tank factories now producing medical equipment. The technological restrictions remain in place, Alan continued. We cannot build weapons of mass destruction. We cannot launch spacecraft beyond our atmosphere. But in every other way, we have been left to develop freely. And develop we have. The screen showed graphs of global statistics, declining violence rates, improving health outcomes, reduced pollution, increased education spending. Without the constant drain of military budgets, nations have invested in their people. Without the ability to threaten war, countries have been forced to resolve differences through diplomacy. The result has been the most peaceful and productive year in modern human history. Lisa Grant, sitting in the front row, smiled up at him. She had helped compile much of this data, working endless hours to document the changes happening worldwide. But the question remains, Alan said, his voice growing more serious. What do our visitors want from us? What are these societal maturity indicators they mentioned? After a year of study, we believe we have some answers. He clicked to the next slide, showing the alien monitoring stations in orbit. These devices are not just restricting our technology, they're measuring our progress in specific areas, cooperation rather than competition, sustainability rather than exploitation, inclusion rather than division. In short, they're looking for evidence that we can exist without destroying ourselves or our planet. In the audience, Professor George Hoffman nodded in agreement. His team had spent months analyzing the alien message and monitoring patterns, reaching similar conclusions. We believe the quarantine is not punishment. Alan continued. It's protection, both for us and for the wider galactic community. They've done this before. Their message referenced other species who passed through this phase. Some took decades to earn their freedom. Others took centuries. He paused to let that sink in. Centuries of oversight. It was a sobering thought. But there is hope. Today, I'm pleased to announce that we've detected changes in the monitoring field. Small but significant adjustments that our scientists believe represent the first easing of restrictions. A murmur ran through the crowd. This was news even to many on the committee. Specifically, certain research satellites can now be launched into low orbit. It's a small change, but a meaningful one. They're watching us, evaluating us, and apparently they see progress. In his farm in Iowa, Eric Nelson watched Alan's speech on television. Diana Fletcher sat beside him, both of them intently focused on the screen. Is it true? Eric asked her. About the satellites? Diana nodded. We confirmed it last week. It's just basic research equipment, nothing that could be weaponized. But it's the first change in the restrictions since they were imposed. A reward for good behavior, Eric said with a slight smile. Like getting privileges back after being grounded. Exactly. And there's more they didn't announce publicly yet. Diana leaned forward. We've detected signals from the main alien fleet. They're communicating more actively with the monitoring stations. Something's happening. Eric looked out his window at the fields he had planted. In the year since leaving the military, he had found a peace he never expected. Many former soldiers had similar experiences. Their training redirected to disaster relief, their discipline applied to rebuilding projects. Do you ever miss it? Diana asked, following his gaze. The old world, the military, space? Eric considered the question. I miss the purpose, the sense of mission. but I don't miss living under the constant shadow of war." He turned back to her. "What about you, still trying to talk to them?" "Every day," she replied. "We keep sending messages, not just words but music, art, examples of how we're changing. Last week we thought we detected a response, but it was too brief to decode." "They'll talk when they're ready," Eric said. "Park rangers don't usually chat with the wildlife." In Washington, D.C., President Joseph Warren reviewed the latest reports from the Interspecies Relations Committee. The small relaxation of the technology ban was encouraging, but it came with new questions. "What happens if they decide we're never ready?" asked his chief of staff. "What if this quarantine becomes permanent?" "Then we adapt," Joseph replied simply. "We've been doing pretty well so far." It was true. The world economy had initially struggled with the sudden shift away from military spending, but had quickly reorganized around human needs. International cooperation, once seen as idealistic, had become practical necessity. Former enemies now worked together on global challenges that no single nation could address alone. The latest polls show 82% approval for the current situation, his aide reported. "People feel safer, more secure." "They are safer," Joseph said. "But safe isn't the same as free. We need to keep working toward whatever definition of maturity our visitors are using." He looked at the photo on his desk. Earth from space, with one of the alien ships visible in the foreground. Once a frightening image, it now seemed almost protective. At the United Nations after his speech, Alan joined Lisa and the rest of their team in a small celebration. The announcement about the satellite restrictions had gone better than expected. "To small steps," Lisa said, raising her glass. "And hopefully bigger ones to come," Alan replied. Professor Hoffman joined them, bringing unexpected news. "We just received data from one of our monitoring stations. The alien mothership is moving." The room fell silent. "Moving where?" Alan asked tensely. "Toward Earth," Hoffman said. "Slowly but definitely approaching. It's the first significant movement since they retreated to the edge of the solar system." "Is that good or bad?" someone asked. "Unknown," Hoffman admitted. "But they've also increased communications with their monitoring stations. The pattern is different, more complex, more interactive." Lisa's eyes widened. "They're not just collecting data anymore. They're engaging with it, responding to it." "Which means they're responding to us," Alan realized. "To our changes." Outside the window, the evening sky darkened. Soon the alien monitoring stations would be visible, passing overhead like new stars. And somewhere up there, the mothership was moving closer, perhaps bringing a new phase of this strange relationship. For a species that had expected war and received education instead, the future remained uncertain. But for the first time since the 30-second defeat, humanity faced that uncertainty with something new. Not fear or anger, but genuine curiosity about what might come next. In a distant observation post, the alien monitors noted the changes, with something like approval. By their calculations, this species was adapting faster than most. The quarantine would continue, but perhaps not for as long as initially projected. Humanity had failed its first test spectacularly, but it was learning from that failure in ways that suggested hope for its future among the stars. The watchers would remain vigilant. The teachers would continue their silent lessons, and slowly, at a pace measured in generations rather than years, Earth would have its chance to join the wider community it had once tried to fight. Not as conquerors, but as students who had finally learned the most important lesson: that true power comes not from the ability to destroy, but from the wisdom to choose not to.